Since 2010, she has presented solo and collaborative projects for exhibitions and festivals in Australia, Italy, and the UK. Delany holds a Master of Fine Art by Research, Monash University, and from 2014 to 2018, she lived and worked in Naples in Italy. So Laura, did you want to introduce your work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So this image that you can see up here right now is one that I found in a vintage rock climbing magazine from the 70s when I was actually going on walks throughout the Victorian Alpine region. And at that time, there was a lot of tension going on. It was way before even COVID, like within, I guess, people's ideas of where they were heading to. And I wanted to use an image that could be an allegory to speak about environmental tensions and perhaps even for it to come into the city, to be used in a space to speak about how we're going to navigate that ahead. So I've created this image, which is an enormous blown up photograph from this magazine, which is about 14 metres high, and it's been superimposed onto the site, onto this building, which is on the top end of Spring Street. So just as kind of at the main arteries of where all the traffic and Parliament House is. And it's a building, a modest building it's both residential and office spaces.
Yeah. And as you said, this work also responds quite closely to the previous work that you'd created in Melbourne back in 2018
yeah.
with Climb Art.
Yeah,
well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that began the process of looking at images that could represent or help think about landscape and internal landscape study. So a study of ideas that we project onto a landscape and where they've come from. So whether that's about conquering a landscape or having control over it or humans against it. And so I wanted to really look at that, or look at internal states and how we then, navigate that through our lives as well. So this work was, at the time for Climb Art, it was developed like a whole series of different photographs that I had reproduced and enlarged and flipped on their sides to look at this relationship between nature and humans. So,
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah.
That connection of the relationship between nature and human, I think, is a really nice way of introducing Amanda's body of work that we've created that's down at the Royal Botanic Gardens as part of the Metro Tunnel Creative Program. And that's a body of work called the Alpine Moth. So just to introduce Amanda as well before we go in. Amanda Williams is a Sydney-based artist who works with analogue photographic techniques to examine connections between the history of photography and physical environments. Tied to explorations of place and imbued with a feminist focus, Williams' practice takes shape through the use of a 35mm medium and large format film cameras, where digital processors often grapple with questions around the virtual. The more traditional photographic methods employed by Williams afford her work the presence of a real historical document.
Thank you. So my work, The Alpine Moth, is the title of this series of work. It's 7 photographs taken on a medium format camera. And it was specifically made for Photo 2021. I wanted to make a work that responded to both site and was based in Victoria. So in a similar way, our work interestingly responds to the same landscape. It's the Alpine region in Victoria. Specifically, these photographs were taken on top of Mount Buffalo, so within the Mount Buffalo National Park. And as with other series of work that I make, my work is not simply a straight documentation of landscape in the traditional sense that landscape photography has sort of carried with it for centuries now as a document of landscape. I'm more interested in embedding myself, staying in that landscape for a period of time if I can, returning to that landscape, getting to know the people within that landscape, also gaining permission from elders and responding to those conversations that I have with elders. And all of those discussions really are embedded within this series in some way, I think. But the particular site that it's exhibited in too, that was chosen for this work.
Because the work is down just behind the Shrine of Remembrance, just down below the Botanic Garden. So it's wedged beautifully between the very ornate building and the fountain, and then the very industrial construction site and State of Flux, which is the construction program for Metro.
That really informed the series that evolved, and the way the series is presented too as a double. So it's a sequence of 7 photographs that then is flipped and repeated as another 7 photographs. So it's a fabricated horizon line in a sense.
It also brings it to the title of the work itself, which kind of led to how that doubling took place, the Alpine Moth. And you speak quite wonderfully of the work as the moth as allegory for the concepts you're trying to reveal and express through the body of work as well.
Absolutely, and an allegory for these times that we are living through. So again, a part of my research with each body of work that I make is to not just walk on country, visit and leave. I'm much more interested in the layers of history that unfold over time. And I did know that the bogong moth migrated from the lower regions of Queensland across central New South Wales, and they have a landing place both in Kosciuszko National Park and also in the Alpine region. And they're sleeping in their crypt-like granite crevices in the mountains was really evocative to me, that these moths that migrate long distances need a resting spot. And that was so evocative that they choose this very specific region. And beyond that, there's this other ecological layer that feeds into the work, and that's really the demise of the bogong moth, that they're in declining numbers now. So it's really layers of narrative, if you like.
And it's kind of it's a lovely play against you've chosen this very small animal that is so significant through its migratory path and through the naming of the mountain, which is this like large scale space, whereas Laura, you've taken something that you have with you, I do believe, the original photo, which is also of such small scale in comparison.
Pretty much like that's a sample of how much it's been blown up. Completely, like the dot screen is just completely exploded.
I think it's really nice to show that as well, to speak on something that I've seen in both your practices as using the archive as a living entity and seeing history as something that comes with us through time and responding to history in that contemporary sense. I wonder if both of you wanted to maybe speak on that a little and how you're responding to that in this work.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, I'm always looking at, I guess, social, like things that are residual memories, residual archives that aren't significant or aren't considered important. So they might be part of private collections or under stairwells in community centres. And often, and my process of finding out information about, because I work a lot with sites, so I work like sites that are of local significance and community. But my approach is also very analogue in that I will not really Google anything. I'll just go into a space and find out and volunteer and work through their collections and have conversations with people that are there sort of housing and looking after these archives or collections, and then through that I will often make the work from where I found it and then put it back in that place as well, or as a bit of as a way of reflecting on maybe where we've come from to where we are now through this localised example. And so for me, this is what I've done with this work as well, where I was in a region looking at outdated material of native flora that you could find that no longer existed because it was extinct, much like, I guess, what you're looking at with the moths. And the other images that really stood out to me were these sort of like subscriptions to a rock climbing magazine that were left behind there or being used. And I guess this idea of these images from a British journal that has been made its way to Australia, and maybe these are ideas that are then superimposed onto our landscape as well. And I found that just as an interesting, again, allegory for looking at our treatment or our relationship to landscape. Mm.
Well, I think I couldn't say it any better than you've just said it. But I think you're absolutely right. What is happening now with archives, and I think the way we're engaging with archives in a much more inclusive, engaged manner. It's not simply a repository that you dip into, take something out, use it, put it back in. There's a sense that the way the archive was made, the way the archive is accessed, the way information in the archive is disseminated is a much broader conversation that's important and that's necessary.
Sure, and then what's not included in the archive too is interesting.
And what's
like
not
moths,
included.
I suppose.
Yeah, perhaps, absolutely. And I think also there's some lovely crossovers with our work in the way that we both choose to research quite heavily, both on the ground as well as back in the studio context. So
I would even say yours is quite a social practice as well, as a photographer, from what you've just described. We only just met, by the way. So.
Yeah, and we have all these crossovers, which of course is Brendan's fabulous. I think
it's just a conversation between us, but thanks for coming.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
It's nice as well, you're talking about the archive and, as you're saying, what information is in it, but that often they're seen as an archive as a source of information, but it's that what information and who's been given access to it, and how do you take that information and what truths do you reveal from it when you're utilising it as well. I think that kind of leads to another really interesting aspect of both your works in this one and in other works that I've seen as well, where kind of bringing us back to the festival's central themes of truths is actually the inverse falseness, and the way that you both play with revealing truths through using falseness within the work. Laura, if you wanted to speak on that, or some of your other bodies of work where you've inverted images, or whether you've changed the geometrics or the collage, or Amanda, where you've reversed and doubled. Yeah.
I mean, just really quickly, I suppose my photographs are, as I said, a comment on the history of documentary photography and what was left out of that history and the way landscape was documented. And so for me, I don't often twist the reality. It's an interesting opportunity that I was offered to show the work in this context in a very different, not a different scale necessarily, because I've been working with analogue photographs at mural scale, but printing digitally, installing it in the location that it's installed in, it was asking for some type of twist, I suppose. And yes, in that sense, it opened itself up to the opportunity for, and perhaps an invitation for the audience to question what they're looking at. And I think anytime you invert an image, take an image out of context, cut in another image on top perhaps, it's an opportunity for the audience to rethink, reconsider what's being represented. It's not just a document of reality. It's being created. It's highly subjective. the reading of it is equally subjective. I think they're the things that I was thinking about with that reversal of my photographs.
Yeah. Because even thinking, Laura, of when we were, because Laura and I worked together to find the site for this work, and when we first were looking for spaces, you wanted to, like, if you want to talk on what your intentions of the site you chose were, because there were those aspects where you were looking to create this kind of, not false intervention in a way, but false landscape within the cityscape that worked quite nicely.
Yeah, definitely, to create, again, a dual landscape, which seems to be what you're doing in your work, where you do have a natural environment together or superimposed onto an urban environment and a built one. And I was looking for a way to open up a space within our city, so between buildings, that could create a moment of pause or reflection where you have a figure holding on or rising. And I wanted to create a moment of reflection that could allow for, instead of constantly filling space, to actually just stare into space and feel this tension going on, which is present in the city at the moment, present in a lot of people's lives, I think. And I think that was brewing beforehand, and that's what I was really wanting to tap into. So I didn't do a lot to the image rather than let it be exactly what it is. And like you said, bringing it out of it into a completely new context is enough of a work, and enlarging it to the point that your eye has to pull all the dots together to see the image, and wherever you navigate your way through the city and encountering it. I think that was mainly, I needed to be in a place that could be just encountered by anyone, that it wasn't in a space where art would be expected, perhaps, so that it could be, not a specific mountain, not a reference to a specific mountain, but to a mountain that perhaps we're all facing at the moment that doesn't have a name yet.
I think you spoke about that earlier as well, about by choosing to do just this single response, because normally you would work in collage, you'd say, and you do more of a manipulation of visuals, where with this work you've shown quite a deliberate sense of restraint in the way you've made it. I think, Amanda, there's also aspects of restraint coming through in yours as well, in how you were given that larger landscape and you chose to double it and reflect it and to just simplify the work in that kind of way as well.
Absolutely. The site that I was offered to exhibit this work in is a 32-metre long expanse of hoarding. So it's both an exciting prospect and also somewhat daunting, because at first I thought I'd taken a great number of photographs, and I thought, well, I could just have no repetition. I could just have a series of the photographs I'd taken. But then the restraint, I think, of creating this false horizon line and the rise and the fall of the granite outcrops on top of Mount Buffalo was really appealing to me. And in a sense, that is really crafting a new view, a new lookout, if you like.
And also, just speaking on the granite pieces there, you were both speaking of it earlier, that I think it's something that's really nice to unpack, is that in terms of rock climbing terminology, a boulder such as the one that is the hero image of Amanda's work would be defined in a way that, Laura, if you want to explain.
Oh, yes. So as part of my fieldwork research, I got a friend to take me bouldering, and I just watched. Oh, I did actually learn. I learned how to do it, but I was just fascinated by the rules and the terms so much. They're like, wow, you're really good at following the rules. But what I found fascinating is that, first of all, you have to learn how to fall, not how to climb. So that was very interesting. And this pragmatic approach to falling, rather than it just being about rising. So that was, first of all, I was like, what an amazing approach if we were to take that with us and apply that to all areas of our life. But then, so I was spinning out on that. And then I did actually climb. But I loved that. So the route you take is called a problem, or the mountain is called a problem. And that as well is something that, we were saying is very beautiful. Yeah.
I've got a friend who's a rock climber actually, and I was showing him this series of photographs and he was getting really excited and I thought, oh, this is good, he must really like my series of photographs. And he was like, Amanda, there are so many great problems. I want to solve these problems. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And of course, he wasn't necessarily looking as a series of photographs. He was looking at each individual crevice and rock as having potential within it for him to climb those rocks. And there's something lovely too about those, the way we both exist within the landscape around us and the way each of us moves differently through it. So yes, he saw this image in particular, and it's not as giant as it looks really. It's probably just a sort of a 6 foot with a reach high rock. But the way you scale it, a series of problems to be encountered. And it is a beautiful metaphor, I think, that links both of our works. And perhaps links, some of those broader themes that are affecting us today.
Absolutely. I think it's nice to consider, as going to this from the perspective of the problem, to flip that, to think of the opportunities that these works have created for you. And maybe it'd be nice to hear of any other bodies of work that you feel have come out of this experience of making this work.
Yes, well, I mean, as I said earlier on in my introduction, I try to spend time in each of the locations that I'm working in, and I spent quite a few weeks over 3 or 4 visits back to the Alpine region. So I started researching other artists, other photographers that had worked in this region, and I discovered an incredible story of a woman who was born very close to this area, Mount Buffalo. Her name is Alice Manfield, and she was an avid photographer. So born in 1872, I think, and she was leading people up onto Mount Buffalo before it had become a national park. And she was somewhat responsible for trying to gain protected status for that location. So as a figure, I suppose I've become quite obsessed with continuing that research. And her photographs, they're all glass plate photographs. So, I mean, there's some of her with a horse carrying the camera and carrying chairs on the side of a horse up a mountain. That in itself presents a number of other interesting conversations about access to landscape, how landscape's been used. But despite that, it's a strong woman born in this space, and I'd like to investigate her practice further because she's not very well known.
And you have also, you've kind of walked in her shoes a bit.
Yes,
on that mountain as well.
And in fact, doing the research while I was there, these photographs, whilst it's not explicit, I was following the very same routes that she took across the mountain that have now become recognised national park walks. So there is something incredible about being given an opportunity to make a body of work. And for me to come to Victoria, and it's the first body of work I've made in Victoria, and it has opened up other avenues. Yeah, it's quite special.
Nice echoes of history coming through.
Yeah, all the echoes of history coming through. Yeah. And the idea that you can open up the archive and discover, a woman at the turn of the century who was incredibly independent, and I think whose story needs to be told. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a nice little side body of work that I hope to continue with.
And if we've got time.
Yep.
That's so amazing because, of course, in parallel.
We've got these parallels happening, yeah. It's wonderful.
This has led me on to want to work with a woman in Benalla who is trying to expose and protect one shed, which is it was called the Benalla Migrant Camp, which is for a lot of migrants that came over in the 60s, and they were held in a pen, basically, and lived there for many years. And so speaking of access and protection, she has been working tirelessly to try and gather together and protect this small archive she has by going out within the Benalla community and finding out people and where their stories have led them to, and children that grew up in these sheds. And the council have just shut her down completely. And so I've been trying to see what I can do to help her expose this, or work on this archive, or make it public. And it's another very strong woman doing it on her own that I would also like to band together with. And that's probably my next step. And this comes from, again, so the walk that I went on and the camp I went on was an artist camp run by artist David Thomas, who takes artists out into different regions to just reflect and come together and make work or not make work. The point is to have no outcome, and it's a beautiful thing. It opens up a space to do things like skimming through materials, going on walking tours, meeting like-minded people. And so out of these 2 camps that I've been on, 2 incredible works or connections have come out of it. And so I'd really like to pursue that. So
Sounds wonderful.
yeah, we'll be busy.
Yes. It's constant, isn't it? Because, the opportunities
Well, you
open
discover,
up all the avenues.
yeah, it's true.
Do we have any questions at this stage from anyone? Hang on, we'll just get a microphone to you and it'll make it easier.
Hello. Oh, yes, I'd like to ask the ladies, maybe Laura, what is your attitude to landscape? I mean, do you think it's a living thing, or does it do something to you? Is it a dead thing? And what happens when somebody takes a slice of the boulder and sticks it on the outside of a building, and so it becomes something else, you know?
What do you mean by it takes a slice of a boulder?
Oh, well, I mean, you have marble encrusted buildings, you know.
Yeah.
See, that came from nature. Or something.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, what's your attitude to
Everything.
nature?
I mean, all the materials we build with all around us come from nature, more than we probably even realise. All the minerals and like even bluestone, everything is a reflection of the environment. It's both, we are part of it and it's part of us, and it shapes us as much as we shape it. And I think that a lot of the time maybe that not having an awareness of that, of how much it is intrinsically part of us, for sure. I'm very interested in a lot of people's different ways of connecting the landscape. I'm not interested in sport, but I'm interested in people that are interested in sport and are interested in having a very intimate relationship with every single crevice within a rock. And that to me is one way of relating, whereas Indigenous people would have a whole different way of seeing that same rock face. So would you, so would I. And that's very beautiful, and they're all important, and they all have a place. And they all need, so it's something that, it's difficult because, of course, we project everything from, again, I don't think we can help but have this really set colonial way of seeing the landscape as something beautiful that's out there in a painting or in a frame. And that's been a lot of the history between even landscape painting that I was studying a lot, to look at that way of framing a landscape. And that is what then I'm opening up by doing a work like this, to try and really break down that frame. And that's why I've then decided to bring it into the city and maybe pose that question more publicly as well.
Thank you.
And Amanda, you've spoken on this actually quite recently as well, of the bluestone of or even the rock forms of yours.
The granite.
As being like the raw monument.
Yeah, used for memorials. I think what's interesting is that a number of the sculptural memorials that are dotted around the city that appear in both urban and in country parks are made of this volcanic granite. And it is, I suppose, these photographs are a reference to that desire, I suppose, we have to memorialise a story, a concept, a person, and we do seem to want to take something solid, something tectonic, a rock, and carve it in a particular way. I mean, I think the way you spoke about it beautifully, that it is quite a Western tradition, and we need to be aware of that and respectful of that history. and whether that's there's a different way of working with landscape and with the way that we memorialise either people or places or events in the future. I think that needs to be rethought. But absolutely, the fact that my work is sitting in this site behind the Shrine of Remembrance, resentment, or Shrine of Representation. I don't know where I was going with that in my head. But look, it's an incredibly special place for a lot of people, and I'm respectful of that. And also mountains are, people are drawn to mountains for solitude, for meditation purposes, for quiet. They offer that. They offer a view beyond. So, yeah.
Do we have another question over here?
A question for Amanda. As Laura mentioned, so traditionally, landscape photography has been associated with a very colonial perspective, basically. I'm interested in finding out how you actually negotiated that when dealing with the traditional owners and elders of the land you photographed.
Absolutely. I suppose just to step back one or two steps, I've been researching landscape photography for a little while now, and I've looked specifically at someone like Ansel Adams and some of those so-called great figures of landscape photography, and what concerned me was that it was a patriarchal view, it was a singular view. So it's important that when I'm on country, I'm researching specifically the people that I can touch base with, and that's by calling the land councils for the areas that I'm working in, speaking with elders. This particular landscape is Tungarung country, and I spoke with one of the elders so that I could gain both permission to respectfully walk on country, make sure that any of the areas that I were photographing were not sacred areas. It's important to me for a number of reasons. I'm not just taking a slice, if you like, of the landscape. I'm hoping to represent the myriad, and definitely I'm representing my perspective. I'm not trying to represent anyone else's story, but it's my experience of landscape. And for me, it's personally quite important that I know the history of that landscape, and that I'm respectful and I pay correct acknowledgement. And I've done that in each of the sites that I've chosen to photograph extensively, revisiting, creating connections with community. It's something that is becoming more important, I think. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
I have one more question for Amanda. Your landscape photographs that are presented are all black and white images. And while they admittedly look absolutely stunning, I was just wondering whether the decision to use black and white film, which is, more traditionally, historic way of documenting the landscape as opposed to capturing the vivid colours that are out there, whether that was an aesthetic decision or perhaps even a political one.
That's a really great question, Elias.
We did play, you did play for a bit.
Yeah,
between the two as well.
we discussed that. The really simple answer to that is that I process all my black and white film myself. It can still be done in my bathroom, or it can still be done at the university. So that's really the starting point for some of my practice. It's important to me that the materials I use, I'm working with them myself. I'm not handing my films over to a lab. So the reason I work with black and white photography in the first place is both practical, it's because I have access to it. It's a material that I can work with, like clay, like a potter would work with clay. Beyond that, of course, it absolutely is a comment, and a political one, a feminist one perhaps. It's a comment on the history of photography and where these images come from, how the meaning has evolved over time. So we can look at a photograph today that was taken back in 1941 that Ansel Adams took down near the border of Mexico, and it's a black and white photograph, and it can have a very different meaning today than it did when he took that photograph. So I suppose I'm interested in pushing that inquiry further, reaching back into the past in order to document the present. I don't know what else I can say about that. I feel like I want to now go away and have a little think and then come back and answer it again. But look, I did some of these, I must admit, some of these photographs were taken on colour film. And so there has been that shift that I've crafted, if you like, from colour to black and white with a couple of these images in this series. And that was an aesthetic decision that was made so that the series sat together. I think I'd love to hear your thoughts too. I'd like to have a little conversation with you about some of that. Or Brendan, your thoughts.
The black and white also works so wonderfully in that space because it can also be seen in the bodies of work that we've installed in Argyle Square around Carlton, and predominantly they're black and white works, and they make the colour around them pop even more. Like they make the prominence of the greens of the trees and the landscape that they're embedded in become even more prevalent.
I think there is... I'm really interested in how the viewers perceive a body of work. When you're looking at something, are you glancing across a photograph? Is it holding your attention? And I do find that black and white photography in a coloured world, in a coloured landscape that we exist within, creates a little bit more of a pause, if you like, and a study. It's also just the thing that, I'm in love with.
Well, I think we might conclude it there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening in this lovely car park. We do have more events coming up, but I've been installing artworks for too long for the last 3 days, so I can't tell you much about them. But yeah, thank you again, and have a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you.